The princess sat alone in her private chamber, gazing out over the distant cityscape. Her mind wandered, drifting away from the noise of the court. She was used to it now, the constant chatter, the endless praise from courtiers and advisors. They all saw her as the future of the kingdom, the one who would carry the royal bloodline forward. But she didn't feel like a princess. She felt more like a pawn in a game she didn't want to play. Her beauty was admired across the galaxy, her intellect respected by the wisest alien minds. But none of that mattered to her. She wasn't interested in the lavish gifts or the promises of power that the many suitors offered. All she wanted was to be seen for who she truly was, a young woman with her own thoughts, desires, and dreams. The royal court was filled with alien princes from various worlds, all vying for her attention. Each one tried harder than the last, presenting her with intricate jewels, rare animals, and exotic delicacies. They smiled and spoke sweetly, but their words always felt hollow to her. They didn't see her for who she really was. They only saw the crown she wore, the title she held, and the influence she could one day wield. It was an exhausting cycle. Day after day, suitor after suitor. They all followed the same routine, bowing before her, offering their treasures and declaring their love in grand speeches. But no matter how charming their words were or how many gifts they brought, the princess couldn't bring herself to feel anything but indifference. She had long since given up on finding a genuine connection among them. Her heart felt heavy, weighed down by the pressure of expectation. She was supposed to marry one of these princes, to solidify alliances with their worlds, to strengthen the royal family's power. But the idea of a marriage of convenience felt suffocating to her. She didn't want to marry a man just because he was the most powerful, the most prestigious, or the most politically advantageous. She wanted something more. She wanted a marriage built on mutual respect, understanding, and most importantly, love. But love was a foreign concept in her world. In the evenings, when the royal courts were quiet and the suitors had all gone home, the princess would retreat to her garden. It was her place of solitude, where she could think without the eyes of the court upon her. She would sit by the fountain, listening to the gentle flow of water, and wonder if there was more to life than this. She wondered if there was someone out there who could see beyond her title, who could love her for the person she was. The princess had grown disillusioned with the idea of love. Every time she allowed herself to feel a spark of hope, someone would remind her of her duty, her obligations to the crown. Her family had always placed her destiny before her happiness, telling her that the good of the kingdom came first. It was a message she had heard so often that it no longer held any meaning to her. But as she sat by the fountain, she began to realize that she didn't want to live like this forever. She didn't want to be trapped in a world where her worth was determined by the power of her family and the alliances she could form. She didn't want to be married off to a man just because it was expected of her. She wanted something real. One evening, as she sat lost in thought, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see one of the royal advisors approaching, his expression serious as always. He was one of the few people who didn't treat her as though she were above them, but even his presence reminded her of her duty. He stood a respectful distance away, his hands clasped behind his back. "Your Highness," he said softly, "the suitors will arrive soon. They are eager to present their offerings." The princess didn't respond immediately. She only nodded, her gaze still fixed on the water. "Do they always have to bring gifts?" she asked quietly. The advisor hesitated before answering, sensing the change in her tone. "It is tradition, Your Highness. The gifts are a symbol of their devotion." The princess sighed, her fingers brushing the surface of the water. "Devotion? Or is it just a show?" He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told her everything. He understood her frustration, though he could not openly express it. He had spent years advising her, watching her grow into the woman she had become. He knew she wasn't like the others. She wasn't interested in the politics of the court or the games that were played. But he also knew that she had no choice but to play along. "Will you be joining the others for the banquet this evening?" "Your Highness?" he asked, his voice gentle. She shook her head, her thoughts drifting once again. No, I think I'll stay here for a while longer. I don't feel like attending. The advisor didn't press further, only giving a small bow before turning to leave. As you wish, Your Highness. But remember, the suitors are waiting. The court expects. She didn't hear the rest of his words. She had already turned, her attention back to the garden, lost in her thoughts. The princess was tired of the games, the expectations, the hollow promises. She longed for something real, something meaningful, but it seemed like that was too much to ask for. She closed her eyes, hoping that somehow things might change. But deep down, she knew that the path ahead was already set for her. The suitors would continue to come, and she would continue to play her part. She had no choice. But maybe, just maybe, somewhere in the vastness of the universe, there was someone who could see beyond her title and love her for who she truly was. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream of that possibility. The grand banquet hall was filled with music and laughter, the air thick with the scent of exotic spices and the shimmer of expensive fabrics. The princess sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, and her face a mask of grace. She smiled, politely at the courtiers and suitors who surrounded her, but her mind wandered. She had seen this scene countless times before, the same faces, the same empty compliments, and the same extravagant gestures. It was all so predictable. She couldn't help but wonder what it would be like if, for once, someone spoke to her like a real person, if someone saw her as more than just a royal title. As the evening progressed, the suitors took turns presenting their offerings: rare jewels, beautifully crafted weapons, exotic animals from distant planets. The gifts were magnificent, each one more impressive than the last. Yet the princess barely paid attention to them. It was all a game to her, a game where she had no desire to play. She had learned long ago to nod and smile, to say the right words, and to keep the courtiers happy. But none of it mattered. She was tired of pretending, she was tired of the charades. All she wanted was someone who could look past her title, someone who could see the real her. And then, for the first time that evening, something unexpected happened. A voice interrupted the flow of the banquet. It was soft at first, almost drowned out by the noise around her, but it was enough to capture her attention. The princess turned her head, her eyes narrowing slightly as she sought the source of the interruption. At the edge of the room stood a human, a man unlike any of the suitors she had met before. He was dressed simply in a dark suit, far less extravagant than the shimmering robes and armor worn by the alien nobles. His eyes, however, held something different. There was no arrogance in them, no hidden agenda, just calm determination. The princess studied him, intrigued. He didn't seem out of place, but neither did he fit the mold of a typical suitor. He didn't carry himself with the usual swagger of the courtiers or the stiff formality of the royal guards. There was a quiet confidence about him that drew her in. For a moment their eyes met. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a spark of curiosity. But before she could say anything, one of the alien suitors spoke up, his voice thick with mockery. "Ah, the human has arrived," he said, laughing. "I suppose we'll soon see what a human can offer a princess like her." The princess's brow furrowed, but before she could respond, the human stepped forward. His voice was clear and he spoke directly to her. "Your Highness," he said respectfully, "I'm not here to offer jewels or gold. I don't have anything to give except my respect and my willingness to listen. I've heard of the many suitors who have presented themselves to you, and I know you have many choices. But I believe that what you deserve is someone who values you for who you are, not just for your title." There was a pause in the room as the words sank in. The princess couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. The other suitors exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of how to respond. But the princess didn't care about them anymore. She was focused on this man, the one who had spoken so plainly, so honestly. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, an unfamiliar feeling. It wasn't the typical admiration she'd received from her many suitors. It was something more genuine, more real. The human continued, his voice steady. I may not be a prince or a king, but I can offer you something far more valuable, my friendship. I don't want to win your favor with extravagant gifts or promises of power. I simply want to talk to you, to hear your thoughts, and to understand what you truly desire. I know I am an outsider in this court, but I believe that sometimes it's the outsiders who see the truth the clearest. His words were different from anything she had heard before. There was no flattery, no hidden motives. He wasn't trying to win her over with grand gestures or displays of power. He was speaking to her as a person, not as a princess. The room had fallen silent, the other suitors staring at the human in disbelief. The princess found herself holding her breath. Could it be possible? Could there be someone out there who wasn't interested in what she could offer, but who genuinely cared for who she was? The princess looked down at her plate, her fingers tracing the edges of the delicate porcelain. She was torn. She had never met anyone like him before, someone who seemed so unburdened by the weight of tradition, someone who didn't see her as a means to an end. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to dismiss him, to send him away like all the others. But another part of her was intrigued, fascinated by his honesty and his willingness to approach her as an equal, not a queen. The silence stretched on, the tension thick in the air. Finally, the princess looked up, meeting the human's gaze, once again. "Why do you speak to me like this?" she asked, her voice quieter than she had intended. "Don't you see that I am bound by duty? That I have no choice in this matter?" The human didn't hesitate. "I understand," he said simply. "But that doesn't mean you have to give up your happiness. No one should be forced into something that doesn't feel right, not even a princess." Her heart skipped a beat. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever given her the freedom to choose her own path. The princess found herself staring at him, her thoughts racing. Could he be right? Was it possible that she didn't have to follow the path laid out for her by her family? Could she have something more, something real? Before she could respond, the human stepped back, giving her space. He didn't press her, didn't try to convince her with more words. He simply gave her the room to think. And that, more than anything else, made her feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The days that followed were unlike any the princess had experienced before. She had expected the conversation with the human diplomat to be a fleeting moment, nothing more than an exchange of polite words in a room full of pomp and ceremony. But something about him lingered in her thoughts, something that made her question the life she had always known. At first, she tried to shake off the feeling. After all, she had countless suitors over the years, each of them saying something that briefly caught her attention only to fade into the background soon after. But this time was different. Every time she closed her eyes, his face appeared in her mind. She could still hear the calm, steady tone of his voice, the genuine sincerity in his words. He had not tried to flatter her with elaborate compliments or offer gifts meant to sway her decision. He had only asked to speak with her, to understand her, not as a princess but as a person. The princess found herself in her private garden again, sitting beside the same fountain where she often found solace. The soft, melodic sound of water trickling over stones filled the air, but this time her mind was racing. She couldn't stop thinking about the human and the words he had spoken. She had always believed that love was something to be controlled, something that had no place in her world. But the more she thought about him, the more she realized how empty the life of a royal princess truly was. The constant pressure, the endless expectations, the fake smiles, it had all become too much. She had spent so many years trying to live up to the ideals of the kingdom and her family. She had never questioned the path set before her. She had always assumed that the right suitor would come, that she would eventually marry one of the many princes from distant worlds and fulfill her duty to the crown. But now, the idea of a life, defined by duty and tradition, seemed more suffocating than ever before. The princess thought back to the human diplomat. He had not cared about her title, her wealth, or the influence of her family. He had cared only about her as an individual. He had offered no grand promises, no pretentious gifts, but simply his time and attention. It was something no one had ever offered her before. As the days passed, The princess found herself seeking out the human whenever possible. She would join him for walks in the palace gardens, or spend time talking with him in quiet corners of the palace. Their conversations were always simple yet profoundly meaningful. They spoke of everything, from the strange cultures of distant planets to their hopes and dreams for the future. The princess found herself laughing more than she had in years. With him, there was no need to pretend. He saw her as she truly was, not as the princess with a crown to uphold. One afternoon, as they sat under a tree in the palace grounds, the human turned to her with a question that made her pause. "Your Highness," he began gently, "if you could choose any life for yourself, free from all the expectations of your family and your people, what would it look like?" The question caught her off guard. She had never truly allowed herself to consider such a possibility. She had always been taught that her life was not her own, that she was meant to serve the kingdom, to uphold the family's legacy. But now, with the human's question hanging in the air, she found herself imagining a different future. A future where she wasn't just a symbol of power, but a person free to make her own choices. She hesitated, trying to find the words. "I've never really thought about it. I suppose I would want to be free. Free from the expectations, the duties. I would want to be someone who is loved not because of my title, but for who I am." The human smiled softly, and for a moment, the princess felt as if she were speaking to an old friend, someone who understood her more deeply than anyone ever had. "You deserve that," he said quietly. "You deserve to be loved for who you are, not just what you represent." His words touched her deeply, more than she could express. She had spent so many years hiding behind the role of a princess, trying to be everything others wanted her to be. But in his presence, she felt like she could finally be herself, uncomplicated, unburdened by the expectations of others. As time went on, the princess began to realize that her feelings for the human had grown stronger. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the moments when they could be together. He had become a constant in her life, someone she could trust, someone who made her feel alive in a way she had never experienced before. But with those feelings came a sense of uncertainty. She had always known that her marriage would be arranged, that she would eventually be united with a prince who could help secure alliances for the kingdom. It was the way things had always been done. The princess had never considered any other possibility. But now, for the first time in her life, she found herself questioning everything she had known. Was it enough to simply fulfill her duty? Could she live a life that was not dictated by politics and family expectations? Could she marry for love, and not just for the good of the kingdom? These questions weighed heavily on her mind as she spent more time with the human. His presence made her feel as though anything was possible, that she could be someone more than just a princess. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. The princess had always believed that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that love was something everyone deserved, even a princess, especially a princess. And so, she made a decision. She would stop pretending. She would stop following the path that had been set for her and start following her own heart. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew that with the human by her side, she would face whatever came her way. The princess stood up, her heart filled with a new sense of determination. She had always lived for others, but now she would live for herself. And that, she realized, was the greatest freedom of all. The princess's newfound sense of purpose and independence didn't go unnoticed. She had never been one to care much for the expectations of others, but now her defiance had reached a point that could not be ignored. It started subtly, at sea. First, it was just a whisper here and there among the courtiers, and then it grew louder. There were murmurs about her disregard for tradition, and how she was spending more time with the human diplomat than with the other suitors. But it wasn't until the royal council convened that things really began to escalate. The council chamber was filled with the kingdom's most trusted advisors, each one an important figure in the royal court. The princess stood before them, her back straight, trying to hide the nervousness that had settled in her stomach. Her father, the king, sat at the head of the table, his face stern as he scanned the room. "Your Highness," the head of the council began, his voice cold. "It has come to our attention that you have been spending considerable time with a human. This is not acceptable." The princess felt her chest tighten at the words. She had been expecting this. Her father's kingdom was built on the alliance with other alien races, and any involvement with humans, especially one as personal as this, was seen as a threat. The humans were not considered an equal race in the eyes of many, especially those in the royal court. The human diplomat had no title, no power, no wealth. He was a man of humble means who had somehow captured her attention in a way no one else ever had. "I see no reason why my personal choices should concern the council," the princess replied firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. She had always prided herself on being strong, but even now, standing before the council, she could feel the weight of their disapproval. The king's gaze hardened, his voice echoing through the room. "You are the future of this kingdom, and you will marry someone who will secure our alliances. A human has no place in our royal family, and this infatuation must end." The princess's heart sank, but she refused to let her father's words shake her. "I will not be forced into a marriage of convenience. I want more than what has been arranged for me. I want to choose my future." The room fell silent. The tension was thick, almost palpable. The princess could see the shock in her father's eyes, the disbelief that she would question her duty like this. She could almost hear the angry mutterings of the council members behind her, their frustration and disappointment hanging heavy in the air. The king stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "You are acting out of line. You will marry a suitor of our choosing, and you will uphold the honor of this family." Tears pricked the corners of the princess's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't afraid of her father's anger. What she feared most was the thought of being trapped in a life she didn't want, of living a future chosen for her by others. She didn't want to be just a pawn in the kingdom's game. She wanted to live her life on her own terms. "I will not marry someone I don't love," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with a determination she had never known before. "I will not follow a path that isn't mine to walk." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment the entire room was still. Her father's face softened, but his disappointment was clear. He knew that this moment would come. He had always known that his daughter, for all her grace and beauty, was not one to be easily controlled. But still he had hoped that she would follow tradition. The council was split. Some of the advisors spoke out against the princess, insisting that her defiance would bring chaos to the kingdom. Others argued that she had every right to choose her own future, but no one could deny that this decision would bring trouble. The princess felt the weight of the room's judgment pressing down on her, but she stood tall, her eyes fixed on her father. The king let out a deep sigh, his voice heavy with resignation. "I cannot stop you from making your own decisions, my daughter. But know this, your choice will come with consequences. Your marriage is not just about love. It is about the future of this kingdom, and if you choose this human over your duty, you risk everything." The princess didn't know what to say. Her father had spoken the truth. She had known from the beginning that her actions would not come without a price, but for the first time in her life, she felt a sense of peace. No matter the consequences, she was choosing to live for herself. The days following the royal council meeting were filled with uncertainty, but for the princess there was also a sense of relief. She had made her choice, and while the consequences were still unknown, she felt a new sense of freedom coursing through her veins. She had finally taken control of her destiny, and no matter what the future held, she knew that she had made the right decision for herself. The human diplomat had been waiting for her, as he always was. He had heard the rumors, of course, about the royal council's disapproval and the threats from the kingdom, but when he saw the princess walk into the garden, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the setting sun, he knew that she was ready to follow her heart. "I don't know what the future holds," the princess said softly, as they sat together, in the garden, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. "But I know that I want to be with you." The human's face lit up with a warm smile, the kind of smile that made the princess feel as though the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. "I've always known that you were more than what they saw," he said quietly. "You are your own person, not a tool to be used for the kingdom's gain." Tears threatened to spill from the princess's eyes, but this time, they were tears of joy. She had found someone who understood her, someone who saw her for who she truly was. Together, they could create a future built on love, respect, and equality. It wasn't the future she had once imagined, but it was a future that felt real and true. The princess's decision to marry the human was met with shock and outrage from the royal court. The council members tried to pressure her into reconsidering, but she stood firm. This was her life, her choice, and she would not let anyone take that away from her. In the end, the princess's choice proved to be one of the most important decisions she would ever make. The union between her and the human diplomat was not just a love story. It was a symbol of the future, a future where love was more important than power, where two people could stand together as equals, no matter their backgrounds or their origins. As the princess and the human stood side by side, they looked out over the kingdom. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow across the horizon. It was a new beginning for them both. No longer bound by tradition or duty, they could finally live the life they had always dreamed of, a life full of love, respect, and freedom. And in that moment, the princess knew that she had made the right choice. Her future, her happiness, was no longer something decided for her. It was